Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. I'm Councillor Colin Ross, chair of this meeting, and if we quickly go around for benefit of people who are on the webcast, starting with on my left, so people know who we are.
Councillor Jeff Ennis, representing Barnsley Council.
Councillor Joe Watton, Sheffield.
Councillor Diane Hurst, Sheffield City Council.
Councillor John Clarke from the Barnsley Borough.
Councillor Jones, Doncaster.
Councillor Ken Wyatt from Rotherham NBC.
And officers will introduce themselves as the items come up on the agenda. Have we had any apologies for this meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Kidd and Collingham.
And Councillor Lodge is due to arrive, and he said he would be late anyway.
He's running late.
And Councillor Maggie Clarke is also unable to attend.
Okay, thank you. Urgent item 2 on the agenda is urgent items and announcements. I've not been notified of any urgent items, and there are no announcements. Thank you. Item 3 is items to be considered in the absence of public and press. No items on this agenda are closed, so that won't happen. Declarations of interest by any members in any items on the agenda. I'll take silence as there been no declarations of interest. Reports and questions by members. Has any member got anything to say at this point?
Do you want me to repeat?
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My concerns about the scrutiny is the fact that we have a limited number of people that are available. I'm here today because I chose not to attend my council meeting at Sheffield. Doncaster, sorry. I was looking at Joe. And consequently, one of the issues I've got is that we have, to me, we have a poor scrutiny process in place. I have got to be aware of what happens within the LEP and the 4 boards within the actual mayoral authority, and yet there is only one scrutiny panel to look after all that aspect. I think that we should replicate the aspects of scrutiny into each board as such that it makes it a lot easier to cover all the aspects within the workings of those areas. That's just one point that I'd like to move forward with, which from our previous discussion probably relates to changing the constitution.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's something to look at. There are pros and cons, because obviously it would involve more members and more time. But can I ask officers that's taken as a request to look whether it's constitutionally viable to have more than one scrutiny board and perhaps shadowing 1 or 2 of the other panels, and the implications of changing the system, and report back. But if you want to say something initially.
Thank you, Chair. I think we review our governance arrangements each year anyway, so that review's sort of starting now. So I think we can take that in, that request, and your thoughts, and look at the pros and cons and word that in. So we'll come back perhaps to the next meeting with some thoughts on that. If that's okay.
Thank you. That's a positive way forward. Okay, thank you. I've not been notified of any questions from members of the public. So there. And item 7 on the agenda, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 20th of October. First of all, can I take those as a true record? Agreed. Thank you. The action log there is under matters arising. There's 3 ongoing actions, but actually over the page, number 47, we have had an email about the digital bus stops, and more information has been tabled. So I think we can actually take that item as complete now, and that just leaves the numbers 44 and 46 as open, and they'll be coming to the March meeting. Okay, again I'll take silence as acquiescence on that, and that no other matters arising. Thank you very much. So that moves us smartly on to item 9 on the agenda, which is the skills strategy, and Roger Wilde, you're going to lead on this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just for the benefit of background, I'll just summarise where we are. It was January last year where the Education, Skills and Employability Board commissioned the development of a strategy for South Yorkshire. The aim of this basically is to provide a long-term vision supported by our key partners that supports our shared ambitions for economic growth, inclusion, in line with employment opportunities. So what we've achieved so far is we've had the board priorities drive the consultation process, which has been engaged with a range of different stakeholders. We've utilised a consultancy called CADA, or CADA, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, who are based in Sheffield, to carry out the stakeholder engagement work on our behalf. We've obviously driven the agenda and the priorities within this, but they've carried out the donkey work, if you like. So what's happened is we've engaged with stakeholders from the whole range of early years through school up to teenage, working life, family, etc., up to the older generation as well, across the sectors of further education, higher education, schools, also looking at the key players in the strategic realm of the region as well, to have an understanding of what everybody's feeling is around the skills priorities based on the priorities that the board selected back in January. So what we've had is we've had a range of responses which have coalesced around a lot of similar things, which is quite interesting to see. A lot of things which we kind of knew, but also things which are nice to see priorities that are coming through that are probably less known at the time. So the cross-cutting points that have come through these, I won't go through the whole feedback from each of those stakeholder engagement process, but I'll give you a summary of what the key things that have come through is the cross-cutting points within the skills agenda are around transport, information, advice and guidance around careers, how social values are part of that, sustainable funding for training, collaboration within the sectors, making sure that it's delivered and driven locally, that it's learner focused, it has a South Yorkshire identity, that there are targeted interventions and holistic support for people, meaningful employer engagements, especially within schools, and innovation. Now these are just the underlying principles and the themes that have come through the stakeholder engagement. Where we are now is we're meeting to try and pull together all the information that we've got into some sort of meaningful form to actually drive through a delivery plan. So we have something meaningful at the end of this, and we're going to test this on the way as well, just to make sure that what we're hearing is the same as what everybody else is thinking as well, so that we're not doing something in isolation. It's collaborative with the local authorities and their own education, skills and employability plans as well, and that we're all in alignment around the priorities for the delivery plan. So what we're aiming to do is to do this over the next month or so, and the idea is to then drive towards having some sort of framework where we have a delivery plan on the back of that, and we're aiming to have something by April/May time, more tangible to look at. We don't want a big huge document that sits on the shelf. I don't think anybody wants a big huge document that sits on the shelf. They want something meaningful that can be related to what people are doing and what organisations are doing, and as a blueprint for change for the short term, but also for the longer term as well for future generations. So that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Questions from members? Jeff Ennis first.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Roger. I'm just wondering about the mechanics of when we publish the draft report. Presumably that will then go out for consideration by the education providers and skills providers across South Yorkshire for their sort of views on the draft strategy, and their views presumably then will be taken into the completed strategy in the summer. Is that the focus of how we're going to deal with it?
Yeah, thank you. That's the intention. We want to echo what we're hearing back to the people that have said it. This includes the training providers, the independent ones, and the further education sector as well, to make sure that their views are reflected in this, but also that there's a meaningful direction of travel as well, so that it actually gives some direction for the future.
Alan next, and then Ken after that.
Does the previous strategy, what we had initially, and when we set it up, does that cease to exist, or is that how it operates at the moment?
Thank you. No, there's never been a strategy for South Yorkshire. We've never had a skills strategy as such for South Yorkshire. All the local authorities have their own independent ones, which is where we're working to alignment, so that there is a common thread throughout the whole of the document, and then it actually reflects what local priorities are in a more sort of higher level strategic way, but also then drives how change can be affected across the region rather than just independently in smaller areas.
I'm presuming they're one of the stakeholders or key players within the process.
All the training providers have been approached, including the WA, including Union Learn, including the colleges, including the independent training providers. We've engaged with everybody we could get in the room, basically. So yeah.
Which didn't happen initially, did it, on the first tranche, where we took 9 colleges, 9 areas, and we just gave them money based upon previous allocations.
I think you might be talking about AEB, which is slightly different in some respects. That's part of the strategy's content is around the AEB delivery that we have, but that isn't specifically what this is about. This is more about the overall programme from, AEB to other delivery as well that's not necessarily accredited, and also the training that comes, say, within the apprenticeships or with the higher level. Or
Just AEB, can you spell out AEB?
sorry, Adult Education Budget, which has been devolved to the region. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Ken, then Diane.
Yeah, is there any sort of central intelligence across South Yorkshire about how many numbers of young people who are not in any form of education, employment or training at the moment?
Thanks. That's a very significant issue which we have, and it's grown exponentially over the last year or so since COVID. And not only that as well, we have a huge number of people that are an older generation that are also not in work or education or training as well, which has an impact on a lot of the recruitment for a lot of the employers. So this is a significant part of the strategy and how we can look to try and change that situation in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think it's very important as far as young people goes that we do know where they are, where they're tracked, and what they're sort of doing it or not doing, rather than looking at that as a general unemployment issue really, specifically for young people. I think it's crucial that we know those numbers.
Yep, sorry. Yes, we recognise that, and it is a really important thing because they kind of fall off the map of tracking. Once they get to the age of 18, they're not registered on any education platforms or any sort of follow-up. It's more a case of the key workers or anybody that's related to them. But if not, then yes, exactly as you say, they're not in the picture.
Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for the report. My question is around the review process that's built into it, because there are certain key issues addressed in the background, but also a reference to ambitions to achieve the net zero programme, and that's going to become more and more important for us all as we move forwards. If we see that there is an opportunity there, do we have any way of stopping, pausing, reviewing and building that into the strategy, or looking for partners to take that action forward? So, you know, how will the strategy develop going forward is perhaps what I'm trying to ask, with particular reference to the net zero opportunities.
Thank you. Yeah, it's something I maybe should have mentioned earlier on. We have cross-cutting themes that are across the whole of the strategy. That includes the net zero green agenda, which all the training aspects of that, also to do with the impact on employment and businesses, etc. But also there's the digital issue as well. Digital literacy and digital poverty is a big factor in a lot of things as well, and inclusion. So that there's the three main strands which are going to cut across the whole of the strategy from start to finish, really. That is a big key feature of this. Rather than in isolation, it's actually making sure it's integral.
Just to come back, does that mean that any provider that is a recognised provider or benefits from the programme or joins in with the programme of activity has to set out how it will address those key issues?
I think not just within the skills strategy, but also within the strategic economic plan, there's the drive for net zero is a key one, and we're looking for all mechanisms to try and support not just businesses but training providers as well to become much more efficient and much more clear about their net zero ambitions and the way that they actually add social value as well, which fits with the Skills Bank ambitions for Skills Bank 3, which is also included within the skills strategy. So there's a range of cross-cutting things here which actually try and aim to do that in a more of a strategic way rather than just a blunt, you must do this. It's got to be a feature of contracting, it's got to be a feature of delivery, it's also got to be a feature of how people access training, whether it's, you know, via on foot or by car. And all these things kind of sit within the skills strategy, but also some of the other cross-cutting documents as well.
Okay, thank you. I've got Jeff wants to come back in, then Joe, and I've got some questions.
Thanks, Chair. I'll begin by declaring my interest, Roger, as a member of the Board of Trustees of the National Horse Racing College in Doncaster. And I think I know what the answer to the question is going to be. The National Horse Racing College is one of the most successful further education colleges in the country in terms of educational and occupational outcomes. Presumably they will be fully consulted at the draft stage about what's going to be included in the finished report.
We intend to consult and sound out what we're drafting up with as many people as possible. So we do have that, and if they're not on the list, then they're certainly going to be. So we'll make sure that they are.
Okay, Joe.
Thanks, Chair. Can I ask? I mean, do we know what are the, let's say, top 10 skills that employers demanding that they're struggling to fill?
Strangely enough, it's more about the employability of the person, which is the issue really. And a lot of employers, and this is what we've found across the board, depending on not which particular sector, but most of the sectors, is that they want somebody who's ready to turn up on time, can do the job, willing to learn, fit in with the team. And this is more of a crucial skill that the employers are wanting, rather than specific, you know, say digital skills or mechanical skills or academical skills. Because the thing is, if you have someone who turns up on time, you can train them. They can go on an apprenticeship, they can do in-work training, they can have in-house training, and a lot of this is something which is coming back not just through the skills strategy consultation, but also the local skills improvement plan, which is running alongside this, and we're working in tandem with, which is working with employers to try and get their views on what the needs are as well. So this is a very central part of the whole programme. And it reflects back to the NEET issue as well. If young people aren't in training or education, then the chances are they're not going to be wanting to go into work very readily as well. And I think that's that turning up on time and being a good worker is one of the parts of the feature.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting. It's a little bit of a revelation. I mean, and then, but you consider that to be part of the strategy, being having a good working culture, I suppose, is how you might describe it. The training providers we're talking about are offering training in how to do that, how to turn up on time, how to apply yourself to a job.
Strangely, it's a thing in itself, is employability, and the whole European Social Fund was focusing on that over the last couple of years, and where the social prosperity fund is going to catch up is around a lot of the people that are neat, be them young people or older people, and not in any kind of meaningful occupation, and a lot of that is around giving them the skills to actually be work ready, and I think that's a problem for a lot of people that are not in anything meaningful for a period of time, or if they've lost a job, or if they've been in college and not done anything for a long time. And a lot of it's confidence, a lot of it's around the social skills which you don't necessarily accredit, they're just things which people need, and I think that's an additional skill in itself, but some people don't recognise that. A lot of the academic stuff and the qualifications that people have are easy to get once you're in the workplace or you're in some sort of institution, but getting them there in the first place is the harder part. So they kind of go hand in hand in some respects. If we can mobilise people that are not doing anything, and the economically inactive term is what's used for that, and that's grown hugely over the last year since COVID, that is going to be a big factor within the strategy as well to do that.
Right, so thank you. So, I mean, thank you for that answer, and I've learned something now. But if I can go back to my kind of original question, which is more, I expected you to say, you know, number one, bus drivers, number two, accountants, whatever it was, and then the question would be, for somebody out there thinking, I want, you know, maybe I'm doing something which is low skill at the moment, but I want to do something better. What is there that I could learn that I could then go and earn more money doing? And is that information that exists? Is it you can say, yeah, look, we're really short of bus drivers. If you can learn to be a bus driver, then you can earn more than you're earning at the moment, or whatever it is. Is that information that exists? And would that, and if not, would it help sort of give people ideas for directions they might want to go in, and improve their lives?
That's a really good point, and I could have covered that earlier on, but it's one of the strands is around pathways, which is a key feature of this, not just for people that are out of work, but for people within school to get an understanding of what the world of work looks like, and how they can progress from wherever their desires are to what qualifications they need, that kind of thing. So that is a key feature, is the whole information, advice and guidance sector, if you like. But what we can provide for the all-age service is a big part of it. So going back to the original question, which is the sort of the skills that people are really in demand for, there are some, you know, mechanical engineering is a key one. There's things around medical technology is another one. Digital skills, a variety of digital skills, and that not just people who are working in the sort of computing sector, but also in other industries that require digital skills to make that job work. So there's a range of them. The problem we have in the region is that the majority of people are in low-skilled jobs, low-paid jobs, and don't progress. And that progression is part of the training, which is what we're trying to ingrain within the system. But also, that's a push and pull. It's the people wanting to have the training, but also the employer wanting them to have the training, and investing in the people as well. So there's a range of different things within there that make the whole thing work. But the biggest problem that we do have is there's a lot of people in low-skilled work, a lot of people, and that's grown. It's not got any worse. It's not got any better. It's just got worse. And the high-level skills are the things that we need for the region to make it grow more economically, and that's the area where we need to have people progress rather than just stagnate within a low-skilled job.
Thanks. Final point. I mean, there is a mention in the paper of you know, improving responsiveness to employers' demands, and so the question is, well, is that a recognition that we're not doing that enough? I suppose is there an employer demand out there, and there just isn't the provision of the training that's needed that corresponding to that. And maybe, yeah, you've already answered that in terms of the basic employability skills, but in terms of all the others, I mean, digital is somewhere I've worked, and there's such a range of potential things at all levels that it's very hard for anybody to keep on top of it unless you're deep in it, involved in the industry yourself. So I recognise it's a challenge to define, never mind to solve, but it would seem to me that if there's a problem in reacting to what employers are saying they need, which would then create opportunities for people if they have those skills, that needs to be in bigger and bolder letters, and not point 10 in a list of bullet points.
No, that's a good point. And as I mentioned, the local skills improvement plan is focusing on the employee demand aspect of the skills system, which is why we're including the findings that has and making it a central component, which is currently running at the same time as we're developing the strategy, which is very convenient, but also we need to make sure we do reflect it. Employee demand there's an awful lot of work being done on the employee demand side, but at the same time, because the region is what it is, it's got huge employers such as the public sector, which are the biggest employers in the region, yet we've got 99% of the employers in the region are very, very small businesses. And so communicating with them is really hard. Having a meaningful conversation with them is quite hard on the level that we need, which is kind of where the local skills improvement plan is working at the moment to try and get that conversation going and hear from those that don't normally have a voice, because a lot of employers that are needing these skill needs, have these skill needs, don't have a voice particularly. It's mainly the larger industries that can have a louder voice and tend to demand where the direction of travel goes, if you like. So we need to have a balance there with the larger number of the smaller employers to help them grow and develop as an industry, alongside the needs of the larger employers that have a larger workforce. So it's a balancing act, really, and I think making sure we have that balance of voice is really important.
Okay, thank you. John, do you wanted to have a question?
Thank you for the report, Roger. I'm just wondering, following on from what Joe says about people with skills and who haven't got the skills. Traditionally jobs that have been done by males, and we're looking for to fill them gaps now. Is there any females coming forward to do traditionally what a male has done, or don't we find that they're still sticking to the same jobs that they've always done, each different gender?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the things that we want to try and prove is the fact that there's when we say social value, the whole issue around a job isn't based on your gender, it's based on your ability to do the job at the end of the day, and I think that's more widely accepted. But then again, it depends on the employer, and it depends on the individual applying for that job, and there's a push and a pull there as well, which is a difficult one. There's a lot more females got into digital, which has been a drive for the industry, which is really encouraging. That said, there's some industries where there's been a drive, but there's been less of an occupancy. So for example, in engineering, there's a lot more women going into engineering, but maybe not as many as we'd hoped, and maybe the levels of seniority aren't quite as good as we'd hoped, and maybe there's work to do in that space as well. So is that just a training need, or is it to do with the employment, or is it to do with the business, or there's a few things in there that we need to pull out if there's a problem, and if it's to do with the training need, then it's going to be really important that we reflect that in the skills strategy.
I'm just thinking, because traditionally men have done heavy work and ladies have done different work, but there is loads of opportunities now for females to do plumbing, electricians and things like that, where are not too manual, but we still don't seem to have the uptake of crossing that divide from what's normally a female job to what's a male job.
I think the sectors have moved quite a bit now in sort of equalities wise, and I don't think that's necessarily an issue. I think there's maybe an issue around salary levels and maybe accessibility to work-life balance is more of a struggle for some people, and predominantly more women than men, strangely enough. But that's kind of the way it is. So having a job pattern that fits around maybe school run or childcare or other care is maybe a feature that changes where people go for jobs. It's not going to be the full reason, but it can be a big pull, because traditionally, like you say, in the olden days, women were the ones that looked after the kids, the man went out to work, which obviously is a long time ago now, and things have changed since then. But even so, there's some things still hang around, and the big feature of this is that a lot of women tend to do more than one job. So it's a case of they're not working less or less harder or not doing as a bigger contribution, they're just doing it a different way, and it's not always reflected, sadly enough.
Okay, thank you. I just got a few points and then we'll move to the recommendations. I mean, it's clear that as well as the training providers, employers have got to be heavily involved in this, and it follows on from Joe's point and me, where are the skills shortage, and I fully take your point about the soft skills being ready for work and then people can be trained, but we need to align the training providers to where there are opportunities to go on to, and that's vital in there. The other is about the level of training and apprenticeships. I was talking to an employer yesterday, and I know, and I've said this myself, that we need high-level apprenticeships, for the industries going forward, the high-end manufacturing, the green technology and so on. Talking to an employer yesterday, he was saying there is still a demand though for traineeships rather than the more academic apprenticeships to bring people in at the low level who find the apprenticeships and the day release to college or whatever not what they want. He was wanting to take in more traineeships. Is that part of the skills strategy as well?
Yeah, well, there's two things there. One, firstly, traineeships have been finished, so they're not going to continue. But they tend to be replaced by the T-levels and work experience opportunities in a different kind of way. I think because the take-up wasn't quite so high, that it seemed to be other methods to try and get people into work have been tried, and apprenticeships are a better way to do that, but it's then for the commitment from both parties to actually sustain that rather than it just being a work experience opportunity. So yes, these are very key features within the strategy, because it's meaningful work makes people want to do it, but at the same time you have to get people into that, and different entry points mean different levels of qualification. Those without any qualifications are going to struggle to get into some jobs, so apprenticeships are often a better route. Training providers, like you say, working with employers and meeting what employers need is a key feature as well, because it's knowing that the demand's there so they can run the courses in the right way that fit around people's lives. So there's a few things there, and there's an awful lot of different balances, but that's the main thing, is to try and get that right. But yeah, as I said, the replacement for traineeships is out there, but it's not going to be them as a standalone, I'm afraid.
Okay, I've learned something each day, but I think my point still remains about having different levels of entry. Alan, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, I just want to follow on from Councillor Hurst. Are there any proposals that, you've got this area of skills to look at, education and all the rest of it, and jobs, that business becomes part of that? In other words, are there any proposals to combine some of your finance with some business proposals? And I'll talk about, going back to what you talked about, the not on the carbon, all that. Zero carbon, that was it. Yeah. That have actually talking to some manufacturers to create a centre of excellence, and we'll listen to the topics in the news about gas, electric, and heating homes and all the rest of it, so that we could talk to manufacturers to actually get them to be part of that investment as well, coming into South Yorkshire, Mayoral region, and establishing a centre of excellence, which would cover what I believe is going to be a growth area in the future. Has that been talked about at all?
Well, it has in a way. I mean, the skills aspect of that is definitely part of the strategy within the whole of the range of different age levels and ability levels, because it's a significant future job opportunity. But I think alongside that, there are developments taking place that include a lot of the work that we're working alongside. The Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District, for example, the retrofitting academy model, which Sheffield City Councillor leading with Sheffield College, should hopefully meet some of those targets that we're looking at. But it'll also provide employment and training opportunities for a lot of people that either have low skills or no skills, at the same time as targeting those that have got higher skills to offer the technology aspect as well.
Can I just come back on that, Chair? When you say the connection between, is that small companies, that actually provide that service of installing those type of equipment, in relation to upskilling and such like?
The retrofitting model is around that. It's around things like heating systems. It's around insulation. A lot of the stuff which is part of the whole agenda for better efficiency in housing. But it can also then lead to other technologies as well. So you can then look at the low carbon, look at the small scale nuclear. You can look at the electric EV stuff as well. There's a whole host of different things there where you can have training and job opportunities, not just at a very highly skilled level, but also at a smaller skilled that can grow into the industry. So there's, it is part of the picture, because we make sure that we're thinking beyond just the next couple of years, but like into the next 10.
So in the process, if we looked at, say, 10 companies within South Yorkshire that were doing that type of work, would it be worthwhile to actually go to them and say, here we are, we've got this site, we want to provide you with a centre of excellence? Because it not only says, here we are, we can do that, and we're taking account of what would go forward, but there's also a possibility that somebody from Wakefield or Leeds or Doncaster might come to the centre of excellence and be trained, and therefore it increases the opportunity of employment and all the rest of it in South Yorkshire. I'm labouring the point, I suppose, but to me it seems a good idea. But if we just rely on small companies, we should be able to try and look at bringing those companies together. Are you with me? We're all trying to achieve the same aim, which is a reduction in the net zero. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, the recommendations, as said, members are invited to note the progress and development and timeframe of the strategy in this paper. I'd like to add to that is in that I think also take note of the points raised. You know, we're part of the consultation, if you like, the points raised in this meeting, in particular, trying to align that training providers are aligned with the employers and where there is need for various skills, green jobs and so on. And I've seen that Joe wants to come in as well, but the general points as well, because I think it's important. Well, I don't think it's important. I know it's important that we get this right, because the future growth and economic development relies on a skilled workforce, and it's got to be the right skilled workforce. And the other thing is about different levels of entry to the job opportunities as well. Joe, what do you want to add to that?
Thank you. No, I entirely agree, and I think it's been a useful discussion. I'm conscious that there was possibly a version of this, or a version of this strategy that came to, or a related skills proposal that came to the skills board in the last year, that was then rejected by all the member authorities. And that I do wonder, I suppose I'm asking the question, is that why this has come here? In which case, we've had a useful discussion, but we've not addressed whatever the issue was with that. I don't know if anybody can help me with that.
Can anybody enlighten us on?
We've not submitted anything other than proposals for doing this, the consultation, the strategy, which is where the EASY board, so the Employment Education Skills and Employability board, proposed that we did do the consultation. The one thing that did change was some scope. That's some of the areas that we looked at were refined, and that went back to the board in January, which is when it was proposed that we did the consultation. So maybe that's where you're thinking it was from.
Right, I'm aware there was a dispute over it was how the AEB funding was passported or something, and there was something about monitoring of results, monitoring of performance. Well, look, I mean, if that's not related to this, then that's fine. But I just thought if that was the issue that caused the problem last year on the skills board, then and we are functioning as a scrutiny board for all of the policy boards, then we ought to be clear that's what we're doing. And I was slightly nervous that maybe that had been raised and thought that ought to go to scrutiny, and what's come to scrutiny has been interesting and useful, but not related to the problem.
Okay,
but if I'm sure that that's not the case and everything's fine, then I'll drop it.
I'm not sure we're going to get a definite answer to that, but I think the comments are well made. But go on.
So yes, I can answer that. Yeah, I know which one you're talking about now. It was an AEB paper. It was the Adult Education Budget paper. It wasn't skills strategy. So that's not related. Well, it's related, but it's not the same thing, if you know what I mean.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Alan, is it on this point?
Yeah, it's one that I did read and marked up. which is about communication and marketing implications and advice. I'm very conscious that from Sheffield to Rotherham to Barnsley, Doncaster, that there are diverse areas, and it talks about marketing communication officer. We'll look at this draft, but I feel as though that sends a notice to me. This is a generic thing, whereas I believe that certainly areas for marketing ought to be quite more specific. I don't know, but I just wanted to make the point. Rather than being generic, it ought to be specific to certain areas.
That was an internal, just an internal marker in the document to say that
10.1 on the report.
Yeah. So the marketing and communications lead within the authorities had a look at it to see what the implications were. Yeah. So that's not going to affect the actual communication of the document outside at all. That's going to be done in a different kind of way.
Okay, going back to what I said, can members agree to my additional comments on the recommendations? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much.
Look forward to seeing the report.
Okay, we now move on to item 10 on the agenda, South Yorkshire Renewal Fund, and Gareth, I think you're leading on this one.
Yeah, this is my report with the accompanying presentation. I'm happy to take you through the slide pack.
Yep. Yes,
It's
please.
about 12 slides, I'll spin you through. Just an introduction. I'm Gareth Sutton. I'm the Exec Director, Resources and Investment. I think I know a few faces from Audit and Scrutiny, but thanks for having me here today. So the presentation that we've got before you today is talking about the Renewal Fund. Now that's just terminology. It's a concept. It's about how we use our devolution monies and how we might use more money into the future. And a really important point about this is that we have an opportunity. So for as long as I can remember, we've been incredibly reliant on short-term government funding streams. They always come with loads of conditions. We have to spend money really quickly, and they don't lend themselves to much longer-term planning. And it's longer-term planning that ultimately will unlock the potential for South Yorkshire, not reactive short-term decision-making. So I'll take you through a few things today. If we could flip the slide back on. So I'll just take you through what the basis of the Renewal Fund is. I'll outline what the MCA board has agreed so far, and we'll discuss some key principles, because those principles run like a stick of rock through everything that we're doing. I'll talk to you about the phasing of investments. So our devolution deal is a 30-year deal. So again, it engenders a longer-term approach. So we are phasing what we do at this point in time. I'll make some really important points about what we call the Project Feasibility Fund, which is central to that longer-term planning. And I'll talk to you about capital funding that we've made available in the near term. I'll then discuss what we call the place plans and the regional plan. These plans are the longer-term investment prospectuses that will really hopefully allow us to turn the tide from that reactive nature to a much more proactive nature about how we do things. And then finally, I'll just touch on government oversight. So whilst devolution does give us much more flexibility and much more local autonomy on how we spend money, we are still subject to government oversight, and we will have to justify what we've done. Okay, if we could flip on, please. Unfortunately, you got my head in the bottom right-hand corner. So there we go. Okay. So the Renewal Fund was intended to be a fund of funds. So we get lots of different funding streams from government and from different places, including local authorities. But sometimes it's been really difficult to draw a line between all those individual funding streams. So we talked just then in the previous session about how we can link skills money up to net zero ambitions and so on. And sometimes that's constrained by the funding that's given to us by government, and it makes life really difficult for us. But gain share offers us an opportunity to break out of that. So this gain share settlement relates to the 30 years of £30 million that we will receive from government. And that sits at the heart of everything else that we intend to do, and all the other bits of funding that we get, whether it be from government, whether it's the transport levy that comes from local authorities, or whether it be other money that we generate locally. And this gain share grant comes without conditions. So this is why it's really important to us. So when we get transport money, like our city region sustainable transport settlement, it comes with a 30-page document that says what we can and can't do. The gain share devolution deal document comes with 1 page. And that's local autonomy, and that's devolution in practice. So we do have much more scope about how we use that money flexibly and how we can use it to join the dots and infill where we've got gaps in our funding. But we do have to show government that we use that money well. So that's about us earning our devolution powers. So it's not here's some money and off you go, guys, and we'll talk again in 30 years' time. This is about us showing that the North and the region and South Yorkshire can be trusted with devolution, and we will use the money and the powers well, and we will make more of an impact than government would if they spent everything from Whitehall. So this gain share really offers us the opportunity to break out of being reactive, being short-term in our thinking, and being constrained by these really pernicious grant conditions to being a forward-thinking authority, thinking much longer term, planning ahead, and being ambitious. And that ambition is really based on that longer term thinking. So we've got this new money, £900 million, and it's complemented by borrowing powers. So borrowing powers are something that every local authority has. But up until relatively recently, the MCA could only borrow for its transport activity. So whilst we have all these new devolved skills powers and economic growth powers, we had no power to actually borrow for any of that activity. So we could only spend the money that government gave us. So we were reliant on individual in-year cash flows to support our activity. So if we had the best idea in the world, and it required us to borrow some money and repay it over 10 years, we couldn't do it. And that was a real inhibitor. So the game has changed now. Devolution gave us powers over what we could do, it gave us funding to do it, and it gave us borrowing to allow us to time when we implemented investment. So it's a real opportunity for us to think differently and work differently. So just flip on to the next slide, please. So in determining what we did with all these new tools that we now have in our toolbox, we recognised that we needed to commit to a series of principles, such that every time we made a decision, we had an anchor about how we would make that decision and what was important to us. So there are 6 really important principles, and the first is that we would be policy-led. So this was focused on delivering the ambitions and policies of the SEP as the starting point. So we have an anchor document, an anchor vision, and that's the strategic economic plan. So that's at the centre of everything that we do. The second principle was around equity. And that was about ensuring that each authority, each of the 4 authorities, plus the MCA and the Mayor, would get an equitable share of programme funds, but not necessarily all at the same time and in the same way. So things will inevitably change over time, but we recognised that it was important that there was an equitable distribution of funding over time. And the third point was around economic impact. So central to everything that we need to do is the ability to create a better, stronger and more resilient economy. That is what the MCA is here for. It's not another layer of regional government, another layer of bureaucracy without purpose. So we are there to grow the economy. But it can't be simply growth for growth's sake. So there are certain things that are really important to us, and that includes social impact. So we want jobs and we want economic growth, but we also want greater inclusion. And we want good value created. And green investment's really important within that. So we could invest everything that we did in low-skilled, low-value jobs, and that would secure jobs, but it wouldn't secure better jobs, and it wouldn't help social inclusion. And the fifth really important principle for us was about place. So we wanted vibrant places for people to live and work. So this is central again to what we do. And we wanted that investment to contribute to our net zero ambition, so we had sustainable growth and sustainable places within South Yorkshire. And the final really important point for us was around sustained investment. So we recognise that we have a 30-year devolution deal here that gives us a significant amount of money, but that money could go quickly, and we might never get another devolution endowment. So it really encourages us to think about how we can make that money go as far as possible, because it might not be there again. So wherever possible, we'll seek a financial return on investment. So if we're talking to a business about a business investment, we start that conversation from the principle that we'd like some money back, please. It's not just straight public subsidy. We recognise too that in some instances you can't get there, and sometimes there is just a need for pure public subsidy. And that matters a lot in terms of place development. So you will all have regeneration plans in your town and city centres. And sometimes that is just required for straight grant. But if we can get a return to the public purse, we'll seek one. Just flip over, please. Okay, so decisions have been made today, but the starting point is to recognise that the devolution deal was signed into law in July 2020 amidst the first national lockdown. So this all happened, and it was great that it happened, but the timing was frankly awful. We got all the new powers, we got access to the money just as we were really reacting to what was happening on the national scene, but also in our local communities. And at that point, there was no plan for how we'd use that funding, and there was no plan for how we would use the powers. We were all head down thinking about how we would deliver other activity. So this authority passported £50-odd million worth of additional restrictions grant through to the South Yorkshire local authorities over this period. And it delivered a £38 million getting building fund programme over this period. So there's quite a lot going on at this point. So initial work really focused on two strands. So we needed to agree the principles on how the fund would work, and that's what we just looked at. And the second point was understanding practically how the fund would work. And that comes down to things like distribution of monies and how we would transact. And now, board made a number of important decisions following this, and that largely reflected the need to react to the impact of the pandemic, and then the need for a more considered approach to the long-term investment. So there were some things that just needed to happen because we were in crisis mode. But then we recognised that if the benefit of this was a longer-term planning approach, we needed the space to think about that. So the key decision points include the commitment of 2 full years of gain share funding in March 21. So we got the money and the powers in July 20. We then did quite a bit of work about how we would use the next 2 years of money over that period up to the financial year end. And this included investment into what we called the Renewal Action Plan. So I'm sure at that time something was brought forward to the committee about the Renewal Action Plan. And that was all about how we were going to rebound from the impacts of the pandemic. And at that point we were forecasting some real serious economic damage, high unemployment, and the need for the MCA to stand up and put its money to good effect. We also identified other unfunded priorities at that point where we didn't have money because government weren't interested in investing in it, but we now had access to funding, and that includes things like flooding, which is really important in South Yorkshire. So we never had access to flooding money, now we had an opportunity, so we allocated money then. The board made subsequent decisions in 2021 and 2022 to fund emerging unfunded priorities. So things were coming through as we were working through the pandemic and out the back end, and we didn't have money for it. But again, the gain share power funding and the devolution powers offered us the opportunity to do something about that. So we invested into a travel concession for 18 to 21-year-olds. And we also invested into a number of business opportunities that otherwise would have stalled and been lost to the region. In January 2022, the board made a really significant decision to phase the longer-term gain share investment. So we focused then on an interim 2-year step. So from 2022-23, the current financial year, and next financial year, we made big decisions about taking that time to think about longer-term plans and investing in the near-term priorities, but then having a much longer-term approach to long-term investment. And then that was followed up in March 22 with a commitment to that longer-term 26-year distribution of the gain share money. and we would fund 4 place plans, 1 for each local authority, and then 1 regional plan through that investment period. So quite a bit has happened over the last couple of years. Real focus on phasing investment where necessary to support immediate term priorities, but retaining that long-term oversight and commitment to that long-term plan. Could we flick on, please? So this is what it looks like graphically. So I think there are essentially 3 investment periods where we've phased this investment. So as I said, in March 21, funding was released from the first 2 years of Gainshare to support the immediate response to the pandemic. And that was largely a reactive phase. So we put around £6.5 million into emergency recovery funding during that period. And that was to support local authorities who at that point were pumping lots of money in to support communities who were reacting to the pandemic. We put £5.5 million into flooding. So we reflected that we had some real priorities around flooding and then supporting the Connected by Water scheme, but we simply had no money previously. So we used some of our money for that. We put money into bus infrastructure because we recognised that public transport was really struggling at that point and that we needed to do something to stimulate demand. We'd not had money over the previous years to do this, so again, we used local resource and local powers to get this done. And then we invested into the Skills Renewal Action Plan and the Business Renewal Action Plan. So this was about looking at what we thought the consequences of the pandemic would be. And we were focusing on things like high unemployment and the need to retrain large sections of the workforce. So we set £7 million aside for skills funding and just under £7 million aside for business funding. And the thematic boards are still working through how we use that money to good effect, because of course the pandemic didn't really have the consequences that we thought it would on the economy, but some of that is now beginning to unwind, and we're into a period of high inflation and potentially recession. We also invested money into business investment, and that was some really good forward-thinking businesses who were either growing within South Yorkshire or were coming to invest into South Yorkshire. Those opportunities would have been lost at that point as the equity markets and loan markets retreated. So we plugged that gap. We then moved into a planning phase from March 22 onwards. And that was about supporting the development of the longer term plans. So we put lots of money into what we call the Project Feasibility Fund. And I'll spend a little bit more time talking about this. But that was about kickstarting ambition. And we do that by releasing revenue to the local authorities and to the MCA. So you'll know that over a decade and more of austerity, the capacity to develop really forward-thinking, ambitious plans has been nullified in many respects. So this money was there to come up with really good ideas about what we would use our long-term money for. We also set money aside for project management and for debt financing if we needed to take on borrowing to support some of those ambitions. And then in March 2022, as I say, we made much longer term decisions. And this was about how we would distribute the last 26 years of the Gainshare settlement monies. So that's a really significant amount of money. And we decided that the boards would split that money between each individual local authority and the MCA on a per capita basis, so a per head of population after a 20% top slice for regional activity. So that meant that we distributed £468 million worth of capital and £312 million worth of revenue across the 5 MCA partners. And that would support the development and delivery of the 4 local authority place plans and 1 regional plan that would be co-developed between the MCA and each of the local authorities. So at that point, we have largely distributed the Gainshare funding that was given to us by government. Okay, could we flip on, please? So I just want to talk to you a little bit more about this planning phase because it's really important. I think it's central to what we're doing at the moment. So January 2022, the board agreed to this phased approach to the Renewal Fund, and then it was ratified at the March board with the agreement of the funding allocations. So the key point was about this interim step before the disbursement of longer term funding. And this is where we're up to right now. So we would make the decisions about an interim step, which would be during the current financial year and the next financial year. And it reflected two really important points. And the first was an acknowledgement that in most local authorities, long-term investment plans would need to be developed, and that we'd need funding and space to do that. So there weren't long-term plans sat on the shelf ready to go. And that was because we never had this opportunity before. We'd not had the powers, we'd not had the funding. So why would people be dreaming up really good long-term investment plans? So we needed to get on with that. But there was also an acknowledgement that development and delivery teams in each of the local authorities were also under incredible pressure to execute existing activity. So government made a lot of capital funding available over the pandemic period because they were really concerned that the construction sectors would seize up and that there wouldn't be investment. So they released money to us for what they called the Getting Building Fund, which was place-based monies, and they released money to us for housing schemes through the Brownfield Fund. So there was a lot of capital money in the system, and we were struggling to deliver it all. And that was leading to capital programme slippage. So you may have seen my finance reports over time where we talked about £100 million worth of capital programme slippage from one year to the next. So there were lots of pressures in the system, and we needed time and space to deliver these plans. So that's what we were doing. So we committed to this year and next financial year to develop and place in the regional plan. And to enable that, we made £24 million worth of revenue available through our project feasibility fund to support that. So allowing each local authority in the MCA to bring in capacity and to bring in skills and to get these longer term plans developed. But we also agreed to make £26 million worth of gain share capital available over this period. And that was making sure that where there were good schemes that were ready to go, we didn't sit on our hands, and we made some money available to people. So we flip on, please. So the project feasibility fund is something very new to this region. We have not had a similar pot of money available to us before. And £24 million of revenue reflects the single biggest revenue investment that this authority has made. So it recognises the importance of what we're trying to do here. Funding of early stage design and feasibility works has been a problem for us for a long time. And we are at a competitive disadvantage to similar MCAs. And we're at that disadvantage because other MCAs either have a really revenue heavy gain share deal, i.e. all their gain share funding comes 100% revenue, whereas ours is 60% capital, 40% revenue, or they have business rates retention pilots, and sometimes they have both. So lots of authorities have a deal where they retain business rates with each of the local authorities and take the government share. We had that in our initial deal that was on the table in 2016, but because of the circumstances around One Yorkshire, we never got that deal over the line. And by the time we did sign our deal in July 2020, the government policy agenda had moved on. The funding didn't follow. So we don't have the same revenue resource that other combined authorities had. So we've not been in the same space as a Greater Manchester who can spend lots of money on funding bids and lots of money developing longer term strategies. And that's placed us at a disadvantage. This is our attempt to redress that balance. So the lack of revenue constrains our ability to get ahead of funding cycles. It impacts on the quality of our bid submissions, and it means that we have to design, develop and deliver schemes in programme windows that are largely just there for delivery. So I'll just give you a really simple example. Every time government release funding to us, they say you've got to spend it within 3 years. And we have projects that don't exist beyond much more of an idea in someone's head or a title on a spreadsheet. So we spend the first year developing what that idea means. We spend another year bringing it through our business case process, and then we've got a year to deliver. Other authorities can use that 3-year window just to deliver. So they get their schemes on time and they get a great reputation with government. We're behind the curve. And it's because we've lacked revenue to get ahead of that curve. So again, this is our ability to change that. So we're putting £24 million into the system. We've split that money between the 5 partners within the MCA, 4 LAs in the MCA, on a per capita basis after a 20% top slice, and we released it on a light touch basis. So we recognise that what works best is what works best locally. So each LA needs the discretion to think about how best to use it, and each LA might be different. Now flip on, please. Second bit that I just want to describe that's happening in the current year and what will happen next year is around the money that we've made available for capital delivery schemes. So I mentioned that previously. £26 million worth of capital that we're putting into the system. So we recognised that there were lots of strains and stresses in delivering the existing capital programme, that we didn't want to exacerbate too much, but equally we recognised that we didn't want to pass up good opportunities where they arose. We also recognised that inflation was becoming a problem. So there were lots of programmes that were already underway, that inflation was biting into the resource available, and in some cases we were looking at really good schemes that just couldn't deliver because they weren't affordable anymore. So we recognised that we needed to put some money into the system. So board have allocated £26 million worth of capital, and we put a little bit of revenue into the system as well to enable borrowing if required. And that borrowing would just be a bridge to the longer term funding allocations that we noted. So March board notes that schemes would be delivered on their merit, within the principles that we previously discussed. Beyond that, how we distribute that money, we kept deliberately flexible, so it was to allow schemes to emerge. The funding wasn't distributed to the thematic boards, it was retained by the MCA board, and the next slide will just show how that's working out. So over the course of the current financial year, we've worked with each of the local authorities and we've worked with the private sector to bring forward a number of propositions. These largely fall into 2 buckets. There are business opportunities and there are place-based opportunities. So we've done some really good work in bringing forward investment to the Canon medical project based at the Olympic Legacy Park in Sheffield. And we've just approved a scheme for the National Centre for Child Health Technology also in Sheffield. We've worked with Barnsley on their plans around the town centre, and there's some really good schemes coming forward around the civic quarter and the I forget the name of the bridge.
The bridge beside the railway
Sorry,
station.
an active travel bridge that we're also supporting. We're working with Doncaster on a business opportunity to the northeast of this city around Carcroft, and we're working with Rotherham around priority place schemes that they're keen to bring through, including the sorry, my memory's going. And we're working with Sheffield on a number of other schemes as well. The funding is largely committed at this point, but there is some discretion on how we use the balance. So good schemes coming through that will enable us to get capital investment into the system in the next year or so. So next slide, please.
Market Gate Bridge.
Market Gate Bridge, sorry, yeah. Okay. So that is the interim 2-year phase. So we've had this reactive phase whilst we dealt with the pandemic. We're now into this interim phase where we're developing longer term plans and we're delivering capital schemes. So where are we up to with the development of the place plans? So each local authority is developing a place plan, but they're at different stages in different places. So we're working with every local authority to bring these through. And the really important point for us is that we try and get some commonality between the plans. So we don't want individual plans that exist in isolation from one another. Wherever possible, we'll develop scale within these. We've also agreed some transaction processing around distribution of funding and how we deal with things like borrowing. So in many ways, it's a really simple process that we're proposing, where each year the distribution of gain share will be passported through subject to the agreement of business cases and the place plan. And each authority would be responsible for its own borrowing. So we give you the revenue funding and the capital funding, and then the local authority, Director of Finance, will decide how best to use borrowing powers to deliver that activity. And we're also undertaking a review of the assurance framework at this time, and that's giving consideration to how assurance of place plans and the regional plan could be undertaken most efficiently. So again, it's really important that we show government that we're a good custodian of the devolution powers and funding that they're given to us, but we've got to find the sweet spot in how we apply that rigour in an efficient way. So that review is underway, and we've got some proposals that we'll be bringing forward just recently, just soon. The development of the regional plan is also underway. So the new mayor has came in to power in May, and the mayor's brought forward his manifesto commitments. So we're working about how we align those manifesto commitments to things like the SEP and other regional aspirations. And the intention is to produce a single medium-term delivery plan. And the focus really will be on the need to transform South Yorkshire economy at pace and scale. The intention is to secure agreement on a set of interventions, so how we will invest the money and agree the outcomes, and then invest into the feasibility work. So we've now got money to properly deliver this, so we can go from a manifesto commitment or an idea on a piece of paper, use the revenue funding that I've described from the project feasibility fund, get it worked up into a really good investable proposition, and then get it into delivery. The regional plan needs to complement the place plans. And that's a really important point. So again, we don't want 5 individual plans that don't talk to each other. It's really important that they all work together such that we get scale and that we get complementary activity. But the final point is that we don't have to be constrained by the funding that is available to us. So we don't have to just think about all this longer term planning in the context of £900 million worth of funding. It's actually important to go beyond that. So we set out what we think South Yorkshire needs, and then we go and challenge government about that. So we've got an investment prospectus when we get to the end of this with loads of good ideas and good investable propositions, and we are challenging government to fund what we can't fund locally. And that's where the other MCAs are. So the reason Manchester gets lots of money is that it's got a big old pipeline of things that it's consistently and constantly talking to government about. So when money pops out of government at the end of the year, when they've got an underspend, government knows that Manchester have got a good scheme. And that's where we need to get to. And this is our opportunity to do it. So the final slide is just about government oversight. So yes, devolution does give us lots of local autonomy, and it does give us the powers and the funding to deliver. But we are still accountable to government and to Parliament ultimately for how we use that money. So government affect that oversight through 5 yearly gateway reviews. So on the basis that we signed our devolution deal in 2020, our first gateway review will be in 2025. So it's coming up soon. So those reviews are intended to check in on the use of our gain share and our devo commitment to growing the economy. So they will want to look at what we've done and what impacts it's had. And the knowledge that we have from our peers who are further down this process than us is that it's invasive. So this isn't just someone coming out for a nice chat. Government will properly be testing what we have done. And we know that they've appointed a firm called SQW to undertake the review of our activity. And there's some important lessons in this. So SQW are not a firm of accountants. They're a professional services firm who advise on economic development. So this isn't going to be a traditional audit where someone's just coming in and checking invoices and so on. They will be properly analysing what we are doing. So we will need to justify everything that we've done. So we'll probably come and talk to you more about that process over time, but hopefully that brings you up to speed with where we are now with the Renewal Fund. I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Gareth. That was very comprehensive, and it's given us an insight. I'm sure there are plenty of questions. I've got Jeff first.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Gareth. It's obvious that a lot of hard and detailed work has gone into drawing up this 30-year plan, and I congratulate the officers on the work they've already put in to define that plan, shall we say. I just wanted to focus to some extent on the fact that we're at a disadvantage in coming to the table late compared with your Merseyside, West Midlands, etc., and Manchester. Do the government acknowledge the disadvantages that we are placed in, and will they take cognizance of that through SQW or whatever when they're actually looking in detail at the plan that we've drawn up?
I think government do acknowledge that our 2016 deal is not as favourable as the deal that we signed in 2020 because the policy agenda had moved on, and we make that point consistently to them, that regardless of whether the policy agenda's moved on, actually what's really important to us is the resource. So yes, you might not be giving business rate pilots out to MCAs anymore, but we'd really like to be at the front of the queue for whatever comes next to get us onto a level playing field with our peers. So you're entirely right, Councillor, that needs to be part of the narrative when we speak to SQW, that we were behind the curve and we're now trying to redress that, and we've got a plan in place. So it's important that they judge us on the longer term activity, not the reactive things we had to do during the pandemic to keep the economy moving, and what we've done in the interim. So we are setting the really important foundations now for a 30-year plan, not a 5-year plan that will be finished at that point.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I mean, one of the things that I highlighted there was we're actually even more disadvantaged than I perhaps appreciated by the delays over Yorkshire or whatever, missing out on the revenue and the business rate retention. And yeah, not only didn't we get the 900 million laid, we missed out on some things there. And basically what you're telling us that the next phase of the plan, the development phase, is trying to redress that. So we're going to have some, I'm going to use the Boris Johnson phrase there, oven-ready projects, but yeah, ready to present to government. So instead of having to working up and bid, you've got one off the shelf, and we're paying catch up with this money. And I've interpreted that correctly, have I?
That's entirely right. I think the one important thing, if I could ask the committee to take away from this session, is that this is the one-off opportunity that we have to stop being reactive and be proactive and work up our ambitious programmes of activity and visions for South Yorkshire. We've got the money now to do it, and it's really important that we do invest into that ambition.
And I think it's beholden, because you've delegated some of this development of the plan to the local authorities, that the local authorities produce quality projects and not short-term projects. We've been guilty in our own authority of a short-term disastrous project for £500,000 sort of and things. And as I say, it's not just having any projects, it's got to have high quality projects that and this is where the review will come in, that they'll check that they're going to have a long-lasting economic benefit.
Exactly that. So the focus, as I set out in the principles, was that we need to achieve economic growth through this activity. This isn't about funding the bits of the capital programme that the local authorities can't afford through other funding streams. This is about doing the one-off bits that we can't deliver that will really have meaningful change within the region.
And just on governance, while I'm on that, delegating revenue to local authorities. Now, all local authorities, not just here, but they're in difficult financial situations. What are the governance arrangements in place to ensure that revenue delegated from the MCA isn't used to plug short-term holes in their own finances, that it is used, it's ring-fenced, if you like, to ensure that they've got the long-term vision, long-term projects developed?
Sure, that's a conditional grant about how we distribute that money. So we placed those conditions on, saying that we were essentially buying long-term place plans from each of the local authority, and we put conditions on about how they can use that money within a broad context. We also do regular check-ins, and we have 6 monthly reviews into where they're up to with that money and how they're using it. Because one of the things that's really important is is that we need to work out what works best. So we've not had this sort of money before, so we don't have lots of experience in how best it could be deployed. So we're really interested in lessons learned, and part of that review of how people have used it will be important in how we might use money into the future.
Yeah, so strong governance arrangements need to be in place. Okay, I've got Ken and then Diane.
Yeah, my question is broadly similar to yours, Chair, and it's we've got the block of revenue, we've got the block of capital coming through, and that split. I'm just wondering, like, how that's sort of like refereed with what you can legitimately capitalise, which, you know, some people could view as say, well, no, that's revenue, but it's legitimately capitalised because it's supporting that capital project. And I'm looking when there's the sort of 5-year gateway reviews, but how's, like, you know, as things chug along, how's that sort of like determined?
So I think the last principle on my principle slide was about recycling money as best as possible. So one of the things that we are quite keen on is where people invest revenue into developing a capital scheme, that they do, if that capital scheme does come to fruition, that we capitalise that expenditure, and then we can flip the revenue back into, okay, what's the next scheme, and then what's the next scheme after that. So that's really important to us, actually. And that's permissible. It's entirely allowed within accounting standards, and that's something that I'm working on with my director of finance colleagues across the region, because that's the sort of behaviour we want to encourage, constantly recycling money wherever possible.
Okay, Diane.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think my question kind of follows on from that, because you're talking about capital, you're talking about revenue. You said that can be used to support borrowing, so that if there's something that you need to invest in that's very ambitious, and you can borrow against that and invest for a bigger project. So if that's the case, who would bear the risk? Because we're all local councillors and we're all very risk averse. Would it be shared between the authority and the MCA, or would it be in the ownership of the authority that had got the pot of money allocated and were using it to finance a longer term development?
It's a very simple principle, is that the local authority or the MCA, whoever was running with the project and was working within their own individual allocation, would take the risk. And that's largely about making sure that there is accountability, but also that people feel empowered to get on and deliver how best they think works for them. So if each local authority has an overall allocation, they have the capital, they have their revenue, they would need to manage the borrowing costs within the revenue allocation that they've got through their own treasury management strategies that no doubt you'll be seeing that your full council's coming through at the moment. Just on the borrowing point, one of the really important things for me that we're encouraging everyone to think about is inflation. So having a long-term commitment of £30 million for 30 years is fantastic, but we know in 30 years that £30 million will not equal £30 million in today's money. And in fact, the work that my team have done shows that you lose about £300 million in real terms value if you just spend that money as it comes in. So there will need to be really careful considerations given to the time value of money versus interest costs. And that's the sort of thing that your directors of finance in each individual local authority do on a day-to-day basis when they're considering how to fund their capital programs. And this is one of the important points about allowing each local authority some discretion on how to think about this, because they will be able to place this individual investment within a much broader context of how each authority is funding its capital program at that point. So it hopefully gives flexibility for people to make that judgment, but it is incredibly important that we do consider the inflationary impacts, particularly in today's environment.
Probably even more crucial given the last year's inflation. Given that, yeah. Thank you. Oh, Alan, before I come to the recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, it appears on paper fantastic to me. One of the things that I've got a concern is, how's the costs for the authority, the MCA, actually taken up within that process? You've talked about what we're going to do with the councils and all the rest of it. How we covered the base costs for the MCA, the base costs, and how you've just brought in inflation into that process.
So that is a never-ending consideration for me, Councillor Jones, in preparing our medium-term financial strategies. So, like every local authority, we have core costs, we have facilities and infrastructure and lots of other things that we have to pay for, not including people. And part of my consideration is how we fund all that without taking too much money out of the gain share commitment, because we need to keep a baseline of activity because it's really important, but I don't want to displace too much money out of this long-term commitment, because it is this money that will fundamentally change what we do as a region. So I have to balance the budget each year, just like you will in each local authority, using a variety of funding sources and lots of different grants. So I showed you a very rough picture at the start of the presentation about the different funding streams. We take small slivers of recharges into all those funding streams, and we will have to look at what we need out of gain share into the future. But the challenge is on me not to take too much out of that, because that's the money that will make a difference.
I just wonder whether you go back to the graph, it relates to the other authorities, but it doesn't actually then relate to this Mayoral authority, and that's what is, to me, is a little bit confusing. If you looked at the question I asked and the tabulated costs in related to that for the MCA, that I would like to see that as part of it, because you're not just talking about short, medium term, you're talking about long term.
I'm not entirely sure I understand the point, but
right. You've shown us on the go back to the graphs, was about the gain share for the authorities, and here we are. We've got DMBC, Sheffield Council, Rotherham Council, DMC. We've got MCA. It just says 20%. So is that where I should be looking at for what the question I've just asked you, which is about how much money you've got to support the MCA for the next 30 years?
yes, so the
Right, okay.
MCA allocation
right,
comes from there, and that will be applied to region-wide activity.
And it's top slicing off the various...
Yeah.
Right, okay, that's fine. Yep.
Okay, it's Joe next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I do think this speaks to this whole area speaks to the core business of the MCA. Is what we're here for. Not just our core business, but probably the reason that we exist is because there was, the intention was to create economic regeneration by devolving the economic levers to the local areas. That was the motivation behind, I think, back to the original like city deals in 2011, 12, whenever it was, and everything that's come following that. So I recognise in your key principles section you've got economic impact, social impact, and place, creating a great place to live and work, and they're all the impacts we would like to see. But I suppose in each project within the fund will justify its existence in terms of one or more of those, which is what we'd expect. But is there a measure of the performance of the whole, therefore the whole programme, in terms of what we want to get out of it, in terms of economic impact, social impact, place, that we can judge the performance of the whole package as, succeeding or failing or scraping by? I mean, I noticed that the paper ends in kind of government accountability for how we spent the money, which is I can see the logic to that, but really what I hope they would want to see, and what I want to see, is that they should be happy with it if it has a good economic impact, a good social, good place impact, and that there's a measurable target to achieve in terms of the performance of the whole fund and therefore regeneration of South Yorkshire. Is that, have we got that? How are we going to measure success or failure?
It's a really good point. What we have sat behind a lot of this is what we call an outcomes framework. That's really testing South Yorkshire's performance against some metrics that we think really important to us. So if committee would appreciate this, I could come back at a later point to talk about that outcomes framework, because those are the core metrics that we think we really need to make a bit of progress against.
I've actually added that to what I'm going to suggest. Yeah.
I'm very happy with that, Chair. Thank you. Yeah.
Briefly, please, Alan. Briefly.
When it comes back to what Joe's just been on about, if I can see a return of X amount on the investments that we've talked about, is that a good measure of how we should look at what Joe's just been on about?
I think so. One of the considerations that we'll talk about if we come back and do this in a bit more detail is that there are lots of metrics that matter to us right now. There are then metrics that really matter to government, which is largely around jobs, GVA, things like that. And that manifests itself in tax take for central government that is equally important to them. Things will change over time, and that's one of the really important issues for us. So the money that we will put into the system will influence what we do, but the really defining issues will be macro, global economic conditions and government policy. So it may be that over time those outcomes that we think matter now aren't the ones that matter in 10 years' time, because government have launched an intervention that's just changed the way we look at the world. So it will be quite organic. But I think it's probably worth a bit of a deeper dive if that's okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, the recommendations are very bland. It says note the report and the accompanying slide pack. Actually, this is the vision of the whole Mayoral combined authority and the purpose of it for the 30 years. So, one, thank you for a very comprehensive look at the way we're going forward. Secondly, we will, you'll get the wording sort of polished as I go through, but we do want to see further report backs on how it's going and outcomes, and actually be very interested to see what projects are coming forward, the individual projects coming forward. The third point really is want to emphasise the bit I was making about strong governance arrangements, not just from national government, but our own governance arrangements as when we're devolving funding to local authorities to make sure they are high quality schemes that are being done. So again, with those, if those extra bits on are agreed, yeah. Thank you once again for that, and we will see you, whoever's left on the board, next time we come, but with a progress, and there is a clear vision of what we want to do there, which is very welcome. Okay, that moves us on to item 11 on the agenda, which is home to school transport update. I asked for this to be put on, and I know we've got £5.1 million to tide us over for the academic year we're in at the moment and the next academic year, but I'm conscious of the fact that home to school transport, particularly in the secondary sector, is crucial about getting quite a high proportion of pupils to the relevant schemes, and if it was to fall over again, we can't just keep using reserves to prop it up. There needs to be a long-term strategy, and really I was wanting reassurance that thought was already being made what was going to happen for the academic year 24 onwards. So over to you, John.
John Dowie, I'm Executive Director of Infrastructure and Place at the Combined Authority. I will try and offer reassurance that we are thinking about this, but it's a very challenging circumstance. So where we end up, I think, will require quite a lot of work, and will require a lot more certainty than I can give you today. Of course, looking at school travel, it's complex, and there's a lot of detail here. partly because it's a mix of statutory and non-statutory. There's a mix of dedicated services, commercial. They've changed over time. We've moved from a system which was heavily reliant on dedicated to one that's more reliant on the commercial system now. We're probably got less information now about who's travelling on what than we did previously. But I think I'll just kind of step back from the detail and just look at the big picture, because in a sense the challenges on school travel is the challenge facing the bus system as a whole in South Yorkshire. And there's a kind of number of key drivers here. So there has been a slow but progressive decline in bus patronage in South Yorkshire going back some considerable number of years. Of course, that has the effect of taking, to use the jargon, reducing the fare box, the income raised from passengers. That process has led to quite financially challenged, financially weakened bus operators who are struggling commercially to varying degrees. All of that was kind of brought to a head, exacerbated by COVID, and we're still experiencing across the piece a 20% reduction in patronage. Now that's not a 20% reduction on travel to school, because of course that has returned after the various periods when schools were at least partly closed, but it has affected the wider market. That is significantly down, particularly the concessionary fares. The older market is down, and that affects the financials. It affects school kids who are using commercial services. Those commercial services are becoming financially weaker. That has led to a process first with a number of years back, before COVID, where an operator running dedicated services went out of business. The passengers carried were absorbed largely into the commercial market, but that market then, as I've said, has become weakened, and since start of this year we've had to put in additional support to keep that school transport going, approximately 5.1 million over 2.5 years. At the same time, it has become clear that we've had to put additional support into the wider bus system because of that post-COVID weakness. So we are currently taking about 12 million in total from reserves. So this is a challenge right across the bus system. We have committed so far to sustain the wider network at pre-COVID levels, or broadly at pre-COVID levels, up to July of this year. Now, in fact, we were not able to buy back the full bus network pre-COVID because of driver shortages in the main, which meant that a significant number of services, about 15%, went last October. But we are committed to keep what remains of the network going until July this year, and of course overlying that is the commitment to keep school services going until July 24. What then happens is partly dependent on what government does. So government is clearly trying to get out of its commitment to support bus services through COVID. They'd originally announced that support was to end in October last year, but thought again at the very last moment in the autumn. A very necessary thinking again, given the scale of the reduction that would then have ensued. That rolled on government support takes us until the end of March. Clearly our commitment to support bus services goes on beyond that till July, but we need to see whether government will continue rolling support forward of some form. whether at the same level or a smaller level. So that makes the government's decision for April, even though we have made a commitment that there won't be cuts in April, but it makes it crucial for the future of the bus network, because if government does withdraw all of its COVID support, then we have a very, very difficult challenge. If the government rolls it forward, then we have a very big challenge rather than a very, very big challenge. So it is not all over by any stretch of the imagination. So that means the MCA, the Mayor and the leaders have some very difficult choices to take once we're clear on government support. I expect to be clear on government support I expect it to be clear this month. I have been told not to expect it this month, so I'm now expecting it for early February. They've got to make a decision very soon, because clearly authorities which haven't made a commitment to support bus services beyond the end of March need desperately to know what's happening on the 1st of April. So I am expecting early February at the latest. At that point we will know what they're putting into the system, and there will be a set of choices. So I expect schools will figure very highly in the list of priorities, because clearly the consequences of withdrawing school services would be very, very severe. But there are no easy choices here. So do we take cuts on other services? Do we sort of accept that maybe have to cut in other parts of our spending? Of course, the problem is this is revenue money. This is exactly the money we were talking about earlier, which is very scarce generally. So that involves some difficult choices. The MCA did earlier this month commit to put the levy up by 2% this year, which was a recognition of the scale of the that's the levy from the combined authority and the Mayor. But that was a recognition of the really fraught nature of some of these choices, and was the first increase in a good number of years. But that itself is just a contribution to helping. It doesn't solve the problem. I think I'm happy to take questions, but that is the difficult choices that do lie ahead of us as a region. And you can rest assured we are making very, very clear to government that the scale of the challenge we're facing, particularly in South Yorkshire, because the weakness of our bus operators, and because government has not seen fit to support this region over the last couple of years. So we haven't benefited for some of the monies that have gone to other regions. So we're making the consequence of that very clear to government.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure I should thank you for that. Yeah. and the good news is none. In the paper they set out two options, but actually basically there's only one option, because option 2 is not really an option
indeed.
at all.
No.
And just trying to see what comes out of it. As I say, the reason for putting this on was so that it wouldn't get overlooked, I know, by officers, but I wanted reassurance as members that it was going, because getting lobbied from local schools, but also from Sheffield education officers as well, who are concerned about what will happen. And behind it as well is some of the commercial services that were being relied on are unreliable in themselves. So pupils are constantly arriving late because the bus didn't turn up that was supposed to get them there to replace. Because one of the arguments was there is a commercial service that can get you there, so we can withdraw one of the dedicated school buses, and that must be happening all over. And I know the Mayor's been into our local secondary schools to speak specifically to King Egbert's in Sheffield, to the head there, about their very difficult situation. Have I any questions or comments from other members? Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Just on 1.6 on page 39, these arrangements were sustained for a number of academic years. However, following COVID, the impact on bus patronage The South Yorkshire formally took the decision to notify the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority in March 2022 to deregister at relatively short notice. I'm very little understanding of how that can happen at very short notice. Can you just expand on that, because it suggests that if somebody had buses, they would need to register to operate a process.
Yes, so to run a public bus, that you do need to register the service and deregister the service. There are regulations which require due notice to be given of changes. So to give people a chance, give local authorities a chance to decide whether to buy back services, to give a chance for information to be made available to the public, so people can plan ahead. So there are a set of deadlines for that. I think I'm right in saying it's about 70 days in total.
It's 42 days by legislation. We have an agreement with operators for 70 days.
Yeah. So that does provide some notice. It still makes it quite tight, though, when you have to find substitute services. There are emergency procedures, so we can buy in services quickly without going through the full procurement process, but it's nevertheless tight. So that's to the extent an operator sticks to the 70 days or maybe squeezes a bit of the 70 days, that makes it tight. It was particularly bad in October last year, which was the second set of changes last year, because government decided so late on whether it would roll forward its funding, which then compressed the whole process, because obviously once government had decided, operators had to decide what they were doing in the light of the government position. Then we had to decide what we could afford to buy back. So it made the whole process quite impossible. There was a very strong reaction from the poor benighted travelling public about short notice, which really, we should not have been in that place. At least we are now, because of the commitment to fund services up to the end of July, we at least won't be put in that position again by government, because we've decided we will pay.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments?
Would there be any costs related, or where would we be looking for costs related after the July deadline, 24?
Yes. So there's a kind of we have a mix of options that we might have to use all of them. So as I've already said, the MCA's spending power has been increased by the decision to increase the levy by 2%, which is helpful and is the first increase in a number of years. We will have to look very carefully at the amount of services we buy back, so saving costs. I mean, of course, we're in an environment where someone is going to suffer, so we have consulted last year on the public in terms of their priorities to help inform our decisions about what might have to go. We are going to look very carefully at whether we can be cleverer in what we buy back, because there can sometimes be ways we can, just changing routes slightly, we can reduce or combining services. Of course, as discussed, putting dedicated schools onto commercial services where we can save money and still deliver the service. So that gives us a bit of scope to go, but I mean, it is a set of invidious choices, really.
Okay, thank you. We just have to note the report, and which obviously we'll do, and I'm sure at future meetings you report on any progress or any developments, and buses is an underlying theme obviously in this, because it's such a crucial thing. Okay, the final substantive item is transport update. I was trying to separate you know, the school buses from other issues. One of the questions that came up in our pre-meeting was about the airport and where we were with any developments, because we're reliant, I suppose, on press releases and stories and what have you. Can you clarify whether the compulsory purchase order initiated by Doncaster has that fallen now or not, or is it still an option?
I think I'll defer to Gareth on that one, since my brief does include transport, but it's transport except the airport.
I think we can say that it's not fallen, it's not gone away, it remains an option that's being explored by Doncaster, and I think that officers and members in Doncaster are deliberating on how best to work through that at the moment.
And previously, when the mayor was here, he was saying that there were people, organisations, companies or whatever, interested in negotiating with Peel to operate and run the airport, purchase it. My feeling is that Peel are reluctant to engage with these people. Would that be a fair analysis?
I think there's probably an element of subjectivity depending on which side of the fence you view this from. I think there are still investors interested and engaged in conversation. I think Peel would say that they're willing to engage it on the right terms, and I'm sure investors would say they're willing to engage on the right terms as well.
I guess I perhaps recognise my comments were slightly leading there, but yeah. So basically, to sum up, compulsory purchase order is still possible, and there's still possible that some other people could come in and take over the airport from Peel.
I think that's where we're up to now, yeah.
Members, are there any other questions, comments you want to raise on transport? No. Oh, Joe.
Well, if you must invite me, I mean, I suppose it would be worth having, because we're here, just a general update on the bus situation, because it's the one issue I get more in my inbox that's relevant to this authority than any other, and I recognise it's under a bind, and the shortage of drivers and you name it. And just where are we up to? And obviously we've had the £2 fare and things like that, which is welcome. But what else? General update. Thank you.
Yes, no. I think that's a helpful question, because actually I've given you. I tend to sort of divide my bus work up into 3 bits, and I've given you the current, which is a bit grim and hard work. There's 2 other streams of work. So the first is, okay, we're starting from a pretty challenged position, but actually there is scope to work with bus operators in the current regulatory framework, the deregulated system, to make things better for passengers. And so that covers a range of issues, keeping an unrelenting focus on bus reliability, i.e. that's a bus actually turning up, and bus punctuality, it turning up on time, which is a big issue. We discussed that briefly at the last meeting, I recall, where I think things have improved a little bit from perhaps a really bad performance a few months back, but it's still not where it should be. So that remains a real focus. There is definitely things we can do in terms of simplifying ticketing, making ticketing more digital, which can offer early wins for the customers. So first, South Yorkshire are in the process of rolling out so-called tap-on and tap-off ticketing. It's a bit like the scheme that's already available in Doncaster, but making it even more sophisticated so it can cope with different sorts of tickets, rolling it out to Rotherham and Sheffield. So that will, when that goes live, and they're actively fitting the kit now, that will offer immediate benefit for their customers. So that's the sort of thing that can be done. We don't need to wait. The powers exist. we just need the will. Similarly, we're looking very focused at information, ways of improving information. We're challenging our operators about you are private sector entrepreneurial operators, so let's have some private sector entrepreneurial activity. You know, let's grow some bits of the market. So, and I think they can. So that's the kind of medium term agenda, and by medium term I mean this year, for actually delivering some improvements similar to the first improvement. At the same time, we are looking and pushing forward at pace with the statutory process for looking at franchising, options for making the bus system in South Yorkshire contractual. Obviously Manchester has started doing that, using those powers. We're at an earlier stage, but we've got tenders out now for the support we'll require to do the assessment required by statute. That will allow us to come back to members in the early autumn and allow them to take an in principle decision about how they want to proceed. And that's, you know, it's very important because it might turn out to be the best answer. Equally, it's very important because operators' willingness to really engage in partnership work does require an extra incentive, I would say. But I think it's really crucial we have all the information, all the evidence in front of members so they can take ultimately a decision that balances benefits, costs and risk as we get towards the end of this year. So lots going on, and it's not all gloom, just a lot of it is.
Brian, and then Diane.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I know it's probably very early on and figures aren't reported. Is there any indication how effective the £2 fare's been? Is there anything to indicate whether there's increase in patronage?
So I think we've got in one level it's still quite early, but we've got a pretty decent feel for what's going on.
2 months.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, of the mayor's one. Yes. So it's produced a very large transfer from people buying period tickets, so no buying a all-day ticket or a weekly ticket, because people have, you know, quite clearly worked out rather than buy a day ticket, it's much more sensible to buy 2 singles. I'm sure it's happened to you, but I've been on bus and tram where very helpfully the drivers and the conductors have pointed that out to passengers who were insistent on buying a day. So there's been a very big transfer, so quite an increase in singles, indeed more than we forecast. So unfortunately for Gareth, he's paying a little bit more towards this. We are less convinced it's produced a net increase in travel on bus and tram. In a way, that's not surprising because people tend to take decisions over the long term. So you switch your mode. You don't switch your mode just, you know, next week because the fares change. You tend to do it. You tend to respond over longer periods of time because it affects other bits of your life. So it's perhaps not surprising people haven't, in large numbers, come back to bus and tram. These changes tend to take longer to work through.
Okay, thank you. Diane?
Thank you, Chair. Revisiting the franchising, because that was always seen as a tool that we could bring operators to the table with and we could show that we were serious about protecting bus network. So could you talk through the next steps? I mean, I see there's a decision to be made about the procurement of an assessor to conduct a franchising assessment. So what will the steps be, and when do you think the seriousness of the position will start to show through, and when do you think that might have an effect on operators?
Yes. Well, I think you know, operators can see this happening, so they're under no illusions that we're working this up and working it up seriously. We've completed one stage, which was the original what's the rationale for South Yorkshire doing franchising, so that's completed. As I said and you referred to, we've gone out to the market for consultants to support us developing the economic case for franchising, which is required by government. We hope to get the consultants on board next month, then aim to do work through that assessment over the next 6 months or so. At that point, we have to engage an external auditor to check our homework. Again, that's required. This is a very extensive and complex process that we've been foisted on us. That's the point at which members have the really serious decision about what's the best way of securing bus services and then hopefully improving bus services for the public in South Yorkshire. What will it cost? What are the advantages, disadvantages? What are the risks? And I think it is a kind of benefits versus risk calculation here, because we can undoubtedly secure better bus services. Can we, and safeguard them, but can we afford that? So that's it's a big decision. I think it's important we've worked up the enhanced partnership. The partnership squeezed that as hard as we can, so members can properly compare the two. But I think this autumn becomes a really a key moment for taking decisions. Then of course there's a mobilisation, because we have to go out to contract. Then it gets really serious, because we have to go out to the market and say, here's the bus services that we're offering for people to contract for. What's your price?
Thank you, Chair. Getting to that stage, are we still likely to see what Oliver reported back last time, that there would be operators that wouldn't be prepared to respond to a tender or respond to a tender with an unrealistic price?
Yes, so I think there's maybe willingness to respond and realistic price, the kind of two different things. So I think, and obviously Manchester have been through this now for 1/3 of their bus market, where they've now awarded contracts to a number of companies. I don't think they got lots of interest, but I think they got fewer bidders, but I think they got enough bidders to reassure them and us that there is a market out there, that people will want to do these. So I'm less worried about that. I think the key issue is what price are they going to look for running a bus. In a sense, the problem doesn't really change between partnership and franchising. Underlying both is the weakness in the bus market, decline in patronage, relatively weak finances of the operators. So and that is a challenge to both partnership and franchising.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for that update. And no recommendations on that. The last item on the agenda is the review of the latest forward plan, which is here for information for members if there are any issues they want to pick up from that. And I see no indication from that. So that brings us to the end of the meeting. The date of the next meeting is Thursday the 23rd of March. Can we just check that the Mayor will be attending that one? Yes, yeah, he did give us assurance it was in the diary last time. Okay, and we'll consult on what other agenda items later on. Okay, thank you very much, and it's precisely 4 o'clock, or 1 minute past. There you go.